evening there, Lorain. Lorain City, Lorain County. How you guys doing tonight? Hey, Aaron Knapp here. Want to do a little live tonight, a little broadcast, a little podcast. We're going to go by a little bit of a script tonight. I was spending the last hour kind of just revamping over what we saw tonight in City Council. I've got a lot of mixed feelings about a lot of this. I posted some stuff about it. I'm going to talk about it tonight in the podcast. I'm going to discuss all of these things that I've listed in the description. I went ahead and did some research before doing the podcast. I only had about an hour, so I apologize. I wasn't able to get a lot of the more detailed information that I typically like to get when doing these. That being said, I'd like to welcome you guys here to the podcast where we break down all the stories behind the headlines. And today we're going to be diving into something that might sound a little dry at first, but trust me, if it's one of the most important things that you need to understand if you're going to care about how your city is run. And that's Lorain City Council rules, powers, and tough financial decisions that shape everything from public safety to parks and recreation. So if you've ever watched a city council meeting and just scrolled past a viral clip from one, well, you're probably seeing residents speaking their minds, right? Debates get heated and maybe even someone, getting cut off or kicked out. That's not just chaos. It's governed by a specific set of rules, and some created by council itself, others written into Ohio law. So today we're going to be unpacking all of it, including what happens when public comment gets out of control, how council handles budget crises, and what it all means to your wallet, your safety, your voice in local government. We're talking about crumbling streets, restrictive new council rules, secretive backroom conversations, and looming financial storm, and how all these symptoms become bigger. A government that's losing the trust of the people it serves. That's right, folks. Lorain City government losing the trust of the people that it serves. Kind of sad, if you ask me. This is a story of potholes, power, and public accountability. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly why Lorain's future hangs in the balance. So part one of this is going to be talking about council rules and the public comment. So I'm going to give you a little background. If you haven't seen tonight's live, Garen posted it online of tonight's council meeting. It'll be out in its entirety tomorrow. Some of you prefer, I know I've been told some of you prefer to watch it live as they're doing it without Garen's commentary. Others like Garen's commentary. I personally am annoyed by Pretty Bird. I love her to death, but just like my bird, I'm gonna cover you up because you annoying me. And I don't care to see deer, but I love the extra commentary, and I love that he takes the time to video it for us and show us what's going on in the moment. He shows us when people are, texting, and, he takes that time out of his night to educate you, the public. For those of you that maybe have difficulty getting into those sites and doing these things, and trust me, even I do, and I'm computer literate. Like, I go to the Lorain website and try to find the live broadcast, and I just feel like it's such a problem. Like, it's not easy. So Garen does you a favor. He posted online live, so I was watching it while my daughter was in her session tonight. And, I caught bits and pieces. So when I got back home before I did this podcast, and I set it for 9:30, so I wanted to try to stick. So I got through, I watched it all live with bits and pieces cut out, especially during the commentary. Most of the cheer squad of the downtown Lorain people and all that, I didn't catch. But I came back home and I watched all that too. So I went through all of it and I came up with the following. So part one, council rules and public comments. So we're going to start out with the rules of the game. And for Lorain City Council, that means council rule number 47. Okay. So rule 47 governs public comment. Those few minutes, technically too, when residents can step up to the mic and speak directly to council. It's a crucial part of democracy. But it comes with limits. You get a set amount of time, and personal attacks, vulgarity, and outright disruptions aren't allowed. That's because the meetings aren't just open forums. They're working meetings where council has to actually get through its agenda. So I know there's a lot out there that would argue with me on this, and maybe you're right. There's a lot of First Amendment arguments to be made about that rule and these things. Um, and it also goes to talk about what, like, even Jane was saying tonight, is that she was like, "Hey, why can't we have a meeting where citizens come? You know, they call those town halls, and we all discuss these things." Well, because Jane, they're afraid to have this conversation. They don't want to have a conversation with you about that. That would require them to have a conversation with me about that. That would require them to have a conversation with everyone about that. And that's not what they want. That's not what they want, Jane. What they want is organized chaos to keep you from looking at the fact that they bankrupt us. So, anyway, I often digress. Tonight ought to be interesting because I'm filled with a script, which ought to be interesting. As Mr. God, I'm just gonna say it out loud real quick. I know he could probably come here because I don't have him blocked here. I don't miss certain people in my life that I blocked, and so certain people would say, certain things, but we're not even gonna get into that because I was gonna make an antiquated articulation of a certain person's influence on my life, and since I blocked them, to mention their names would be tantamount to invoking them, and they might show up in my feed. But I will just say this: like, it's been nice to not have to have somebody coming in and like just crapping on my parade all the time. I just want to provide direct information. If you want to be here, be here. If you don't. But I've heard a lot of people argue that and myself included, about the First Amendment. I mean, in my previous podcast, I talked about Tia's interaction with the city. There's something to be said about being able to just fling crap like you're a monkey in a zoo, right? There's something to be said about being able to just say whatever you want. But and again, I'm the first one to always say, right, like, it's not all or nothing. So I may criticize certain people in our government. It doesn't mean that I don't also support when they do good things. So, for instance, let's just take my tiff with certain people in the government recently, where it seemed like I might be tiffing with a certain. But see, I'm not. I love this guy. Like, I know, you guys might have seen something that looked a little hinky a while back, but again, it's just me looking out for my friends. And I may do it in a different sort of way than everybody else does, but that's just how I do it. And if I did it any other way, then what would you guys expect? I mean, I just feel like you wouldn't expect the same out of me anyway. Like, this is how I operate. At least you know what you're getting. I never once during the election told him otherwise. Like, I always said, if you guys do something, I'm going to call you out. But the cool thing about that is on these little call outs, what you get to do is you get to correct behaviors. Just like if someone tells me, hey, I didn't like what you said. Hey, that comment you made about me made me feel a certain way. Or even to Mary's point tonight, like, yeah, you guys should respect women a little more. We all should. Well, let me rephrase that. We should all respect each other a little more, quite frankly. We're all kind of rude to each other. Um, I've been bringing it back down again because, as I've discussed often, I brought it to this level because that's what I saw in Lorain. When I got here, I approached it from a different standpoint, right? I came from OSU. I came from a time before this current president, back when, diversity, equity, and inclusion was full force taught at OSU. And there's still a large part of me that's totally in touch with that. There's still a need for a lot of that, but that's not the purpose of tonight's thing. So I come here and I tried this soft approach and nobody listened. Nobody. I never heard from the chief. I never heard from anyone. And so now, now, and now that I've started to be this guy, everyone started to listen. And I'll give you an example. My daughter comes to me tonight after the reason why I can't always go on Mondays, and I'll have to reschedule this when I get elected. But she has a standing appointment on Monday. So we get out of the appointment, and she's made her decision that she's going to end bullying at Southview Middle. Bold statement on her behalf. Here's where I digress, but we're in a little anecdote. And so she starts talking to me on the way home. I said, oh, babe, like, that's fine. But she says to me, like, well, Dad, like I've seen the way that you've done things. I want to make changes. I want to help the community. And I was like, all right, babe, I get you, sweetie. Like you want to make changes to the community. How do you think that And you start asking the questions. How do you think that's going to be received by the community? What's your audience? What are you selling them? Right? Are you selling them you don't want to be bullied, or are you selling them I don't want to be bullied, and no one should be bullied? So I told her, I said, look at what I did with where I started on all this. I started out at the beginning. I said, look, find something everyone has in common, potholes. So I did. We get into the pothole situation. We start talking about it. We go through the potholes and for almost what feels like 2 years, I guess now, I've been addressing this. I addressed it with the three individuals that I now affectionately refer to as the three amigos. Because they've come along like three friends. They all know each other. They're three friends, and they're great guys. Honestly, like individually and together, I believe. I know some might disagree with me. I mean, this goes to the point. I may argue and disagree with Ray Carry-On, but he's done arguably as much as we want to bitch and moan about what he did. He's done a lot for South Lorain, or as Garen likes to call it, South Lorain. You can't knock that. You can't say he hasn't. Did he arguably, when he got sick, basically take care of him and his? Yeah. Can anyone really? I mean, if I'm being honest, I may not like the way that it went down between me and him. But if I'm being honest, am I really going to say I would do anything different than Ray? And can any of you really say that? I mean, seriously, look. The guy did work for the city forever. The guy did do all these things. Arguably, he's not the most qualified to be safety service director, in my opinion. I think there were better choices. But, he put in the work. He put in the time. He did come and go. I've seen his report, his personnel file. He's come, left, gone, whatever. But he put in the time. I like Ray. I just didn't like the way he did me. Do I feel like he maybe got told things had to be a certain way? Because again, nobody stands up against James. Nobody. So why would he believe that I would have any ability to do that? I've shocked everyone in this. I know that. So, but then along comes Mr. Baez, which I said from the get-go, I just feel like this is wrong. And I kept hinting at it, asking questions as I educated myself on Ohio law and the Hatch Act. And then once I realized that, I started telling city council, and I kept telling them, and they just didn't want to listen. And so now he's gone. And we all know why, because he was a police officer, and that's illegal. You can't hold a partisan position. And again, when people tell me, arguably, and I hear this a lot, who should we listen to, you or the lawyer? Well, again, how many times have I been right? How many times have these lawyers told me I was wrong and I've been right? Now I have a law enforcement officer and Mr. Baez telling me, well, I've been reassured I'm good. Okay, I feel you. I feel you. But are you good? Were you good? No, you weren't. And so now brings us to a new one. Like now, immediately, I get it. Look, they appointed him and he's there. So now he's doing what he does. And I don't have any history on him. And I'm cautious about how much I talk about him. But they all are all three friends. They all three know each other. They all three, the torch is being passed down. I don't believe that the government or a job should ever be passed down, right? It should be earned. It should be voted. It should be earned. It should be all these people. Anyway, I digress. And so there's a lot of people that disagree with me back on Council Rule 47 in regards to whether or not it is actually considered personal attacks, vulgarity, outright disruption, those types of things, whether they should be allowed or not allowed. But I always argue when you read the Constitution, and I do read the Constitution. Like when you get into this little baby, well, I shouldn't say a little baby because it's quite big, but when you get into it, and you get into interpretations of it, and they talk about limited public forums, it's been clearly, I mean, this is where the argument gets defined, in my opinion, is that I have the right to redress my government. I have the right to say whatever I want in certain forms. I have the right to say it in email. I have the right to say it. I have the right to redress them in public. Now, arguably, our forefathers didn't have email. They didn't know about the internet. They didn't have all these multiple forms of communication. So we've been defining them and redefining them. And maybe moving forward, this is an area that we have to continue to redefine. Because as I've shown by providing numerous statements of case law to Lorain police on their First Amendment violations with their Facebook page, and as I've shown to other people, that these things can be illegal. And as a certain person who, again, a lot of people got mad at me the way I railed on Rich, okay? But you guys got to understand something. All's fair in love and war, right? And in the grand scheme of things, he was doing some stuff that he shouldn't have been doing. But he taught me one thing. He taught me that as a candidate, if you're not an official, the second you become an official, that's when your page, that's when you start using things that way, it becomes problematic. So I've learned a lot in this process as well. I would argue that I would still argue, and I know some would argue differently, that City Hall is a limited public forum. I would argue that Mr. Bradley's right, our mayor. I would argue that Joel is right, city council president. I know, everybody, hold on. I'll give you guys a minute to get back up off the floor. All right. Anybody have a heart attack? Do I need to call anyone? No, you're good. They're right, okay? Because it's a limited public forum. And as much as we want to argue we have the right to speak and redress our government, not there we don't. Not there we don't. There, it's been clearly established, in my opinion, from what I've read on case law, that we are in a limited public forum. They do have the right to only let us speak in certain ways. They don't have to respond to us. I think they're wrong on the whole reading thing. I think, as long as you sign your name and your address on that sheet, which is why they don't enforce it on me, you don't have to say your name out loud. That's where I hold them accountable to certain little things, because the little things are what matter. Because if you're going to enforce that rule, that one rule with the name, and you're going to do it wrong, then every other rule you try to enforce, what is wrong with these glasses? Every other rule you try to enforce is going to end up being wrong, because you've already broken your own rule at the beginning. So just follow every little rule. So they have a right. They do have a right to tell you to basically shut the hell up. It is. Joel's right. It is their meeting. It's not yours. It's not we the people's meeting at that point. It's city council's meeting. We the people's meetings come in the form of town halls, which is why I agree with Jim. We should have more of those. That is where that role comes into play. So if you, again, all right, so let's say for argument's sake, I'm right about that town hall forum separation, right? Let's say I'm right that city council is a limited public forum, that based on the Open Meetings Act, they have to follow strict rules. And we're going to get into those rules later when it comes to like texting and emailing and all that. But they have to follow these strict rules, right? So if they have to follow strict rules in order to get through this meeting, and they have to follow, even in some cases, as they've chosen to in this setting, Robert's rules, as Miss Springowski likes to talk about. And again, she talks about Robert's rules a lot. I know it. I got it. Like we'll play that game out. And then a lot of what she's saying, she's not wrong. She does have a right. I think sometimes she gets a little overzealous about when she's saying it and really doesn't understand the application of it. But it's their meeting. And so as we go here, like personal attacks, vulgarity, and outright disruptions aren't allowed. And that's been upheld, I feel like. And I've asked people to provide me with case law to state otherwise, and, especially Ohio case law. And that's where the thing comes in. It's like maybe at some point there will be federal case law to challenge this. Maybe that's how you do it. And that's what I've said about this. Like, but they weren't wrong about Tia. They were wrong about Garen because the meeting had ended, and I sent him there as a reporter. I still want to know, And again, Miss Alina was back there tonight. She's always a font of useful, fun chat information, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. She was the reason we sent Garen there to begin with, was that I sent him there to begin with, to get whatever it was that they were saying put in the minutes. They're doing this whispering stuff, and we'll get to that later. Where it's not in the minutes, and we want to know. In Tia's case, she refused 3 times, and we're going to get to that too because it gets in here later. But so I went and did some research in this little time frame that we had this hour. One of the main things I did was I found out that because these meetings aren't just the meetings aren't just open forums. They're working meetings where council has to actually get through its agenda, right? As they pointed out, as much as we may disagree with a lot of the things that they do, they are human beings and they have jobs. And when they leave that job, when they leave that role, that doesn't give you the right to berate them like they're, whatever. Now, when I do it, it's always in the context of their job if I'm doing it. Individually, each one of these people, I have no personal issue with. I may not like the way they conduct business, but we all have different philosophies, different ways of doing things. I'm about accountability. I'm about following those rules because those rules are the only thing that makes sense to me. And they should be the only things that make sense to them. So these working meetings where council has to actually get through its agenda, they're not unique to Lorain. So cities across Ohio have had similar rules, and they've been tested in court. Now, one case in particular that I found in Zanesville, and I posted about it earlier on the page. You can go check it out. In Ohio, right? It's Zanesville, Ohio. You guys are all familiar with that. I'm not a huge, familiarity with every city in Ohio, but I know Zanesville, and it shows exactly what can happen when someone crosses that line, right? So in that case, a resident used the public comment time to hurl racial slurs and insult council members. Now, when his time ran out, he refused to leave the podium. And this is key. Forcing council to suspend the meeting and call the police to have him removed. Now, I get it. Joel didn't do that. That's the Zanesville case that they're probably quoting, is that, they suspended the meeting and had to have him removed. In this case, he was charged and convicted of disrupting a lawful meeting. And when he appealed, arguing that the meeting wasn't technically lawful because of minor procedural issues, the court, they shut that down. They ruled that the lawful meeting simply means a prearranged discussion of public business. And in doing so, they said it was not perfection in every notice and posting requirement. So, like, his convictions, they stood. The big lesson was free speech is protected, but councils have the right to maintain order so they can actually govern. Now, moving to section 2 here, we're going to talk about the rights at council meetings. So the bottom line for Lorain residents who want to speak out in council meetings is you absolutely have the right 100% to criticize policies and officials. You can express anger, frustration, and disagreement, as a lot of people often do. Jane, I love you for that. Like, no matter what, you're not going to be deterred. You're going to say what your piece is, and that's that. Again, you've acknowledged even in your own statements that they're not going to respond, nor are they required to. But you can't personally attack individual members, use vulgar or racist language, or ignore the time limit. That's because it's a limited public forum. Can you say those things in a video chat like me right now? I can say anything I want to say about anyone in this forum, right? And because they're government officials, they can't, come after me and say, oh, I'm slandering them and all this stuff. But no one, for the record, I don't care who you are, you should never use racist language. Vulgar. All right. So that word, though, that's the key, right? Vulgar. Personally attack individual members. You got to dissect that. So to personally attack an individual member means that you're going to come after them, their family, whatever, and say, like, hey, you have a big nose. Hey, like, you're doing this, you're doing that. And even then, those are just descriptives. But I guess it really falls under personally attack, like, you have to get really in depth to get into a personal attack. Um, I almost feel like that's physical. Now, using vulgar or racist language, that's key. Vulgar in the eyes of the Supreme Court means anything that offends the sensibilities of the room, which typically is meant come to mean vulgarity, which is things like obscenity, that pornographies that even certain pornographies that offend the sensibilities of the general public. But to use curse words, that is not vulgarity. So, can you curse? Yes. They cannot restrict your free speech. They can't say you can't curse. They can say you can't say your mother did unspeakable acts with this specific type of individual that happens to be of another species, and those acts were videotaped even when they weren't, and it offends everyone in the room, and everyone's just like, ew, right? Like that's vulgarity. That's being vulgar. And racist, I don't think I should have to explain anyone what racist is. But there seems to be a lot of it. Or ignoring time limit, which I'm going to give you guys a hint. Like, I time my stuff out. So before I do a speech at city council, I think it's going to go over 2 minutes. I write it down, I refine it, and I time it, and I make sure I can say it in 2 minutes because I know I only have those 2 minutes. I believe it should be 3, considering we don't get a lot of those opportunities. And I do believe that Jane had a brilliant idea when it comes to that town hall thing. And that's something that I know Victoria Kempton does and a couple other council people occasionally do. They reach out their constituents and do a town hall. No matter what happened with Mr. Baez, I believe, out of all my council people, he reached out, he was communicating. He's not a bad person. He's a good person. Like, he just made a mistake, and then he didn't want to listen to somebody who knew better. And again, anyway. So, can't ignore the time limit. If you refuse to follow the rules, the council has the legal authority to cut you off or cut off your mic or even have you removed. The courts have repeatedly upheld this right, okay? Like, this is not in doubt. Public meetings are where democracy meets real life, and the rules are designed to balance your right to speak with the council's need to function. Do you have a right to criticize? Yes. Do you have a right to disrupt a meeting to a point where they have to tell you 3 times to get the hell out? To where the point where you start yelling, I'll go get the police, to the point where he says, fine, go get the police, but just leave, to the point where you didn't sign up to speak. You were just yelling out loud. I mean, again, so that's the key about that law, is the intent to disrupt. You had no intent to exercise your freedom of speech because you didn't sign up to speak. You had every intent to disrupt the lawful meeting. And when you started yelling at me like you were a monkey flinging crap in a zoo at somebody, um, you were addressing me. I'm not your government yet, nor will I be in the grand scheme of things because you don't live in Lorain. But that being said, you were addressing me as citizen and yelling in that meeting. And so I am the one that suggested to all these people that they do something about you doing that because, again, I'm not the government. So for you to come in and yell at me, and that's why I just did this to you I'm not going to engage you in that form because then I would have been disrupting that lawful meeting. Honestly, I should have engaged you because they would have charged you if they had the opportunity to charge me. Honestly. But that's the bottom line. The mayor was right. Joel was right. Joel had a reason to deal with that. And so when you start looking at like how I just want to make sure I didn't include this later. So yeah, so I didn't. Um, so when we get down into the nitty gritty of it, the bottom line is I think they're wrong. I do believe that when you look at the law, that state law overrides the city in this instance, and that disrupting a legal meeting or a lawful meeting, and if somebody requested it, as in Mayor Bradley, as in Mr. Arredondo, the president of council, and they stated that this person disrupted the meeting, And what you look at, one of the things I found in all of this, if I can find it real quick, give me 1 second here, because I think I can pull it up, because I was also keeping a lot of notes as we were going through this. So I'm gonna pull this up real quick. Sorry, this is a lot of information that I was trying to go through tonight and get prepped before. So this is one section that I saw. So Rule 47, you're going to want to pay attention to. It ties directly to the Ohio Revised Code, specifically 2917.12, which deals with disturbing the lawful meeting. Now, let me clear something up right away. Cities like Lorain cannot rewrite the Ohio Revised Code. That's state law. Only the Ohio legislature can change it. That's my understanding. Now, I might be wrong. I doubt it. But that's the research I've seen, is that cities cannot rewrite the Ohio Revised Code. What Lorain can do is adopt ordinances that complement state law, essentially putting more structure around how disruptions are handled locally. But at the end of the day, state law always wins. So ORC 2917.12 says no one can intentionally prevent or disrupt a lawful meeting by obstructing its conduct or making statements or gestures that outrage the sensibilities of the group. Violating this law is a misdemeanor, a fourth degree in most cases, but jumps to a first degree misdemeanor if it involves religious stuff. It's not new, but how Lorain chooses to enforce it is something that we need to watch closely. Because again, I think it was brought up in council tonight. She was like, well, when did we vote on this rule that Bradley came up with? And if this rule's been in effect for Bradley or the law department, and if this rule's been in effect for over a year, then why didn't that rule apply to Garen when he was there? I mean, again, they're claiming that this rule came into effect, and it did. If you go back and look, they did all sign it. Although I don't see this being part of that. Like when I posted the rule, it didn't. It had them sign it. I don't think it had this other part. It does say something in there though about them. I think even in the Zanesville case, like shutting the meeting down. And yeah, he should have shut the meeting down. But I think the other side of that is, now if I can find it. So the Zanesville v. Jones cases that involved a citizen who showed up to city council meeting, got his time to speak, and then went off the rails, calling members names, using racial slurs, and refusing to stop even when his time was up. Refusing. The council had to shut the meeting down, and the police removed the guy. He was later convicted of disturbing a lawful meeting and under a local ordinance that mirrored state law. Right? The takeaway is that council has the legal authority to remove disruptive individuals, but the meeting itself still has to follow the Open Meetings Act. If council doesn't follow the formalities, they open themselves up to legal challenges. This is where good governance matters. Follow the rules, respect the public's right to participate, and enforce decorum fairly across the board. Don't let people have an extra 2 minutes, even by vote. I haven't looked into the legality of that, but give me a frickin' break. Like, and I posted something later that basically states that they don't have to give everyone that break. There's laws behind that. They can make exceptions, but they made an exception for her now. And now, who do you make exceptions for? Do I get one? Does Garen get one? Does anyone else get one? Why did other people get D and she got an extra 2 minutes? Again, Joel was right. He said, okay, you guys basically just chucked it all out the door. And they did and they didn't, Joel, because by law or by rule, just because you do it one time doesn't mean you have to keep doing it. There's no from what I can read, there's nothing that makes it codified that if you make a decision once, you have to keep making it. You're not a court, you're just city council. So when we look at the rules and how they govern the rules, we look at 47, and let's see if I can find. All right, so ORC says no one can intentionally disrupt a lawful meeting by physically obstructing the meeting or making gestures, statements, or displays that outrage the sensibilities of the group. What means to Lorain is, well, council wants to they have clear authority to remove people who disrupt meetings. Well, that's fine, but the rule has to be applied fairly and consistently. And let me be clear, disruption does not mean disagreement. Residents have every right to speak up and criticize their government loudly if necessary, right? Loud is not part of the problem. That's democracy. You can be loud. That's democracy. What we need to watch is whether the rule gets weaponized to shut down uncomfortable questions or dissenting voices. Transparency means listening to criticisms and not silencing them. So, when you look at that, the case that Zanesville case is a reminder that residents have rights, but so does council. The key is that both sides need to play by the rules. Council meetings aren't free for alls, right? But they also aren't coronations. Elected officials work for the public, and the public has every right to watch, question, and challenge them. And I think that's what both sides need to remember. And so when we start looking into the ideas behind, why we continue to have these problems, well, it's because council themselves can't seem to stop arguing with themselves. They can't seem to understand that, that basically through physical, the way the ORC describes it is it's a crime to intentionally disrupt a lawful meeting through physical interference, shouting, obscene gestures, or anything that outrages the sensibilities of the body holding the meeting. And that's broad language, and that's where the abuse can creep in. The distinction comes is that criticism and disagreements are not disruptions. So raising your voice to criticize policy, that's free speech. Blocking the podium, physically threatening someone, or refusing to yield your after your allocated time, that's disruption. They can remove individuals as counsel, but they can't silence dissent. Any attempts to conflate disruption with uncomfortable questioning is not only unethical, it is unconstitutional, folks. And the rules must apply equally to everyone, whether you're a homeowner complaining about drainage, a landlord upset about code enforcement, or a political activist questioning spending. The rules must be applied fairly across the board. Selective enforcement opens the city up to legal challenges and lawsuits the taxpayers end up footing the bill for. This is why transparency matters. If council members want to demand respect for the rules, they need to demonstrate that they're following them too. And that's, we start looking at the idea of, council breaks its own rules, that they risk liability and public trust. And understanding that, that it is a crime to recklessly or intentionally disrupt a lawful meeting. And when you use physical interference, such as shouting, obscene gestures, or anything outrages the sensibilities of the body holding the meeting. Do you have a right to criticize your government? Yes. Do you have a right to yell at me and the audience? No. That's where she disrupted the meeting. So again, Mayor Bradley, if you really wanted to go after her for that, that's how you do it. It was not her addressing council that was disruptive. It was her yelling at me. This was vaudeville. And Zanesville v. Jones clearly lays that out. And when you look at, on appeal, the appellant argued the prosecution failed to prove that the meeting was lawful and didn't demonstrate the full compliance with Ohio's Open Meetings Act laws, including proper public notice. But the court clearly rejected that argument. They clarified that a lawful meeting for the purpose of a disruption charge doesn't necessarily mean a perfectly run meeting under every single part of the Open Meetings Act. It simply means a prearranged discussion of public business held by a government body. So, that's just time limits and decorum rules are allowed, but they have to be fairly applied. Public can be required to follow time limits and basic rules, but council must apply those rules evenly to everyone. Council must also follow its own rules as well. So, just to be clear, if council expects the public to follow Rule 47, then the council itself must lead by example, following the open meeting laws, avoiding secret side conversations, ensuring clear, fair, and transparent processes. I'm watching everybody tonight as they're texting and messaging and emailing and typing away on their computers again, how quickly they forget from meeting to meeting. I saw my councilman, Mr. Arroyo, texting or getting text. I saw Mr. I think it was, is it Thornsbury there that sits there, Garen, getting text? Like, I saw whispering between the person to the right of Mr. Arroyo. That's not allowed. Stop whispering, folks. In the last meeting, I saw you two whispering too. What are you guys, like lovebirds? Like, why are you whispering in each other's ears? This is a public meeting. You don't lean over and whisper. And what were you doing under the calendar? Like, and what did you hand her? Like, see, this is the stuff. You guys are all touchy-feely. Like 6 feet, bro. Like, stay your distance. Anyway, I get sidetracked. Bottom line is that Rule 47 can't be a convenient tool to silence the critics. It has to be a neutral, consistently applied mechanism for maintaining order, nothing more, nothing less. So if council crosses the line and uses 47 to silence discomforting speech instead of actual disruptions, they're not just violating the spirit of open government. They're flirting with not only costly litigation that the Lorain taxpayers will have to pay for. At the end of the day, public meetings exist for public accountability, not for the comfort of the elected officials. And so that's what the law says. That's what the Constitution says. And it's what Lorain residents should demand. And so I continue to have these questions about all of these situations and making sure that we are doing the right thing every single time when it comes to allowing people to participate, when we're allowing people to be charged, when we're allowing people to, be removed by the police, when we are allowing people to be, defining between what free speech, because it's protected, but the understanding that councils have a right to maintain order so they can actually conduct business. Otherwise, how are we going to do it? So Lorain residents absolutely have a right to speak at council meetings. That's democracy in action. Everyone, Rule 47 makes sure that everyone gets a fair shot. Meetings don't devolve into chaos and actually city business can get done. This means you can speak your mind. You can criticize policies and officials. What you can't do is personally attack, harass, or derail the meeting. What you can't do is refuse to follow the rules, because council has a right to cut off your mic and even have you removed. And this is the key. Everything I find and everything that I read is council can shut down your mic and order you censored, basically. You can't censor someone that's just yelling crap out from the audience like it's vaudeville. Like, your time's limited. Your days are numbered. And then yell at somebody in the audience, you're crazy. Somebody's in the right position. You can't do that, folks. You just can't. Like, that's the problem. She never signed up to speak. That means you had intent to disrupt. Anyway, and that's the idea behind that. And so I'm just gonna make sure I got everything I wanted to cover on the rights. Because there was one part that I looked up tonight where it really talked about just the way that the way that just taking a look here. I was doing a lot of work, so I'm kind of scrolling through all of it to make sure that I got everything. Legal framework, safeguards we need, shadow of closed door communications. All right. So we're going to drop this one down and go back to our next one. So that brings us to the end of that section, section 2. So now we're on to part 3, council's budgetary power, who controls the money. Yeah, well, I mean, that actually, she can't disrupt the council meeting like that. That would fall under, I think, 42. Garen, like, I think, or whatever it is, there's a couple one above that where a council person cannot disrupt the meeting, or they can be censored or removed from the hall as well, which was well within Joel's right. But there's no way he's going to do that because, again, Mary touts all the time how she's disrespected as a female, when quite frankly, she gets to talk more than anyone. Anyway, I digress. So, council's budgetary power, who controls the money? We're going to talk about, who's arguably or what's arguably council's biggest power, which is control over the city budget, right? Every year, Lorain City Council reviews, adjusts, and adopts a budget and decides how every tax dollar gets spent. That includes how much money goes into our police, fire, and street repairs, parks programs, and even the city salaries. Now, when money gets tight, like if tax revenues drop or unexpected costs spike, council has the authority to impose a hiring freeze or even lay off employees. But they can't just do this on a whim. They have to follow Ohio Revised Code 124.321, which spells out exactly how public employee layoffs work. Now, again, I could be wrong here. I'm just one man doing research, and I only had an hour to do it. What I found was the following. God almighty, I don't. This. Something's on this glasses, and this is bugging the crap out of me. What I found was if council wants to lay off employees because of a lack of funds, they need to clear evidence that the city doesn't have the money to sustain its workforce. That decision comes from either the director of budget and management, that's state paid employees, or the appointing authority for local departments. So somebody in the appointing authority would have to say, we don't have this money. Layoffs can also happen due to a lack of work. If demand for certain city services drops, staffing can shrink accordingly. Finally, council can abolish positions entirely due to the reorganization or cost cutting, but this triggers a process where employees may be able to bump into other positions if they have more seniority. These rules exist to protect employees from politically motivated layoffs and ensure that workforce reductions only happen when truly necessary. So as long as they can back it up, they're good. Hey, Jane. And then finally, council can abolish positions entirely. Oh, wait, I already did that one. And then these rules. All right, I already read that part. So we're gonna. All right. So before I move on to part 5, the real life budget crisis that I found in Athens, I'm gonna pop this back up real quick, and we're just gonna find where I was at before on this, and I'm gonna go back up. And basically, I rewrote and and then refined. I used some Chat GPT to kind of narrow down some stuff, but I have a lot of stuff that I was researching that I kind of laid out in multiple fashions and formats here. And that's where we're at right now. So I'm going to cut through and just see the sections that I have on the employee stuff and kind of go through it. And then as we figure out that. So, oh boy. Mm-mm, mm-mm. All right, so when it comes to city finances, council's authority isn't unlimited, but it's significant. Lorain City Council is directly responsible for adopting the city budget, deciding how tax dollars are allocated, and ensuring that the city lives within its means. The power includes decisions that affects hiring, layoffs, and overall staffing levels across city departments. However, those powers exist within a framework set by Ohio law, particularly Ohio Revised Code 124.321. Again, I've read that. I'm reiterating some of this stuff. It'll give you the opportunity to kind of understand, which spells out how layoffs must be handled for public employees. It says that the rules for reducing the public workforce when necessary. Council and city administrators can't just decide on a whim that they have to meet certain conditions. And that would be lack of funds. And that could be declaration could be based on actual financial data, either current or projected shortfalls. Secondly, a lack of work. If the demand for the services decreases, the council can authorize layoffs due to lack of work, but they have to document it and show that it's justified. I don't know, maybe those assistance positions. Positions abolishment. You can just abolish the position as complete reorganization in the name of the economy, meaning to save money on salaries, benefits, or both. This requires a formal justification. It triggers a process where employees in abolished positions could be allowed to bump. But when you have people that are assistant safety directors, they won't be able to bump. They're at the bottom already. The director of administrative services or the director of budget management at the state level sets additional rules and procedures that cities have to follow, meaning that the council's ability to cut positions is guided not only by its own policies but by these state mandated guardrails. I just want to make sure I cover all that before I get into um, the idea behind there's more layoff process. All right. So now we're going to pop back over here to all right. So we're going to get into part 5 here, a real life example. So in Athens, Ohio, they had a real life budget crisis. And if you want to see what it looks like in practice, just look at Athens, Ohio right now. Athens City Council is facing, serious budget shortfall thanks to skyrocketing employee medical costs. Last year, claims came in at double the usual amount, forcing the city to drain its cash reserves and make emergency transfer of $300,000 from its general fund. To get things back on track, Athens Council is proposing a hiring freeze for all general fund departments, including essential services like police, fire, code enforcement, and municipal court. Parks, recreation, water, and sewer are exempt because they're funded separately. Now, I don't know how everything's funded in Lorain because they haven't sent me the budgets that I've asked for. And until I get into office, I don't know that I'll ever truly know that. People will keep asking me, well, who am I going to cut? What am I going to do? Well, I don't know because I don't have access to that information and they won't just give it to me. But I think I've proven if you give me an hour and the budget, I can find stuff. Um, so, and it wasn't a total ban on hiring. It's a review process where every open position gets scrutinized before being filled. The goal, slow payroll now to avoid layoffs later. So Athens Council is considering withholding its annual contributions to the Outdoor Recreation Council of Appalachia, money that helps fund the popular Bailey's Trail system. And while they support the outdoor recreation, they're making it clear keeping city finances stable comes first. I think we need to think about that when it comes to Main Street Lorain. Now, I'm going to also go back again and we're going to go over the different versions of what we have here in Athens because I did quite a few of the Athens stuff and tried to shorten it down. But I think it's helpful in talking about that the Athens case really does show how city council can make changes, can do things that will change the way that they do things for generations moving forward, that will set the precedent for the city council. Because more often than not, what we always hear is, well, that's the way we've always done things. Well, then how about we change the way we've always done things? That feels like maybe a good idea. I don't know. I mean, then again, what do I know? So it says, Lorain faces many of the same financial pressures as Athens, from rising healthcare costs to unpredictable revenue streams. If Lorain City Council wants to enact similar measures, whether hiring freezes or layoffs, as Mary suggested, it must follow the same legal framework laid out in ORC 124.321. Well, yeah. And so, key points that Lorain Council should keep in mind is that transparency matters. Declaring a lack of funds requires clear documentation and public explanation. Simply claiming the budget is tight won't hold up if challenged. Now, we all know that we're broke, so I don't think that's going to be a problem. Everyone agrees the city's broke. Fair process for employees. Layoffs, abolishments, or freezes must follow seniority rules and bumping rights and other procedural safeguards that protect public employees from arbitrary job loss. Council's role is oversight, not micromanagement. Council sets the budget and the overall policy, but actual hiring and firing decisions are often left to department heads in the mayor's office. That's where that argument came in tonight. Council can set broad rules, though, like hiring freezes, but it shouldn't be picking individual winners and losers. So they can set the hiring freeze, but they can't be picking who gets fired and let go. That's on the mayor and other people, and seniority and rules have to be followed. And then long-term thinking is critical. Slashing staff to save money in the short term can cripple city services and leave residents frustrated. Council must balance fiscal prudence with maintaining core services like public safety, code enforcement, and infrastructure maintenance. The ORCA dilemma was balancing priorities. With Athens, the budget squeeze even led to the council to rethink its commitment to the outdoor recreation fund, which I stated earlier. It had previously pledged to fund, to support ORCA, which was, their outdoor. It's the Outdoor Recreation Council of Appalachia, much like our Main Street. And some of the councils were now pushing to withhold those funds, arguing that protecting essential city services must come first. This type of difficult trade-off is something Lorain can easily face in the future, balancing support for community programs, and already are, nonprofit partnerships, and economic development incentives and initiatives against the need to pay police officers, firefighters, and street crews. So again, while I appreciate Main Street Lorain's want to continue to get their funding, there are other funding methodologies, statewide, grant-wide, that they could get that can complete their funding that isn't taxpayer funded. And if they truly had the best interest of Main Street Lorain at heart, they would seek out those necessary changes as opposed to seeking the city to do it so that we could pay police officers, firefighters, and street crews more. So again, all of those people are necessities. We can't lose them, arguably. And so we're just going to slide on down here a little bit more and just double check and make sure that there's one of the things that I didn't I kind of narrowed down that I think is worth talking about is that the city council was facing a serious budget shortfall thanks to skyrocketing metal costs. The claims came in at double the usual amount, as I said, but it drained their cash reserves and made them. Oh, I did say that 300,000 from the general fund. All right, so we covered that. All right. So, what this means for Lorain. Could something like this happen in Lorain? Absolutely. Every city faces budget crisis, cycles, economic downturns, and unexpected expenses. And every city council has had to make tough calls about what to cut and what to protect. For Lorain residents, understanding this process is crucial. It's not only about showing up angry to a council meeting, it's about understanding how decisions get made, where your voice fits in, and what rules govern the whole process. Um, And then council rules like Council Rule 47 will set the stage for this public participation. State laws like Ohio Revised Code 12432.321 control how layoffs work, and the annual budget process. That's where council's real power plays out right now, what they're doing. If you care about public safety, parks, road repairs, or your own job, if you work for a city, you need to pay attention to these meetings and understand these rules. Now, one of the final parts of our podcast tonight is going to be on potholes. What everything started today. So, part 6, what this means for Lorain. Part 7, the anatomy of a pothole, a microcosm of Lorain's infrastructure crisis. So let's start with something everybody can relate to, is the potholes. If you drive in Lorain and you've hit one, maybe you've blown out a tire, bent a rim, but a pothole just isn't a hole in the road, right? It's a symbol. It's a physical manifestation of decades of economic decline, deferred maintenance, and financial mismanagement. And I feel like it was said best in today's 19 News article where Mr. Baez, Mr. Arroyo, our rep, stated, it just basically it is what it is. And so we end up in this scenario where we have these issues. And so in a historical context, we look at, the reasons why we have these issues. And it's like the Rust Belt curse is what I found. Lorain, like so many other Rust Belt cities, boomed in the industrial era. Then it crashed when manufacturing jobs disappeared. Our street sewers and water lines were built for much larger, wealthier populations. Today, we're left maintaining aging infrastructure with shrinking tax revenue. Every administration from the 1980s to today has faced impossible choices like patch the streets or pay for police overtime, fix the sewers or keep parks open. The result, maintenance gets kicked down the road and literally until we end up with streets that look like war zones. And the science of street failure is that a pothole doesn't just appear, right? It's at the end of a chemical and mechanical breakdown. Water seeps into the cracks, as this video Mayor Bradley posted states. It freezes, it expands, it weakens the pavement. Cars drive fast over it, breaking the surface apart. Freeze-thaw cycles accelerate the process. It's not just bad luck, it's predictable failure. And yet Lorain lacks a proactive maintenance approach to stop it before it starts. And so, the more I look at that, the more I'm just in awe consistently of how they continue to have this continued failure with these potholes just consistently. So we're gonna finish up tonight with me going through the little bits and pieces I did on the potholes, and starting with the 19 News story on Lorain's pothole problem. If you drove anywhere in the city lately, you know exactly what they were talking about: craters, not potholes, right? But this just isn't a weather problem; it's a budget and prioritization problem. How are we spending infrastructure dollars? What maintenance is getting delayed and why? Why, we unpack all of this tonight. We're looking at it like, why are we having these issues? Why is it when I watched on that video today after I got the news come out, they came out early in the morning and were scooping up the debris, but they just drove right on by, right? That little video you saw them like shoveling that I posted, the second one, you notice they left all the rest of that stuff there. They couldn't get out of there fast enough. They didn't want to be on the news. And so that's really where you have to look at the idea behind why are they bolting like that. So basically what we have is chronic underfunding of street repairs. Every year, Lorain's budget squeezes infrastructure spending out of whatever's left over out of its operating expenses, payroll, benefits, utilities, legal settlements, etc. Roads just aren't a priority. They're just more of an afterthought. Deferred maintenance of multiple costs. A street that gets regular sealing, crack filling, and resurfacing lasts decades. A street that's neglected until it crumbles costs 5 to 10 times more to fully reconstruct. By waiting, we're making the problems more expensive every year. That's the problem. Reactive, not proactive. So imagine this. Imagine if all these streets had been getting reactive patching and or instead of reactive patching, had been getting proactive planning. Imagine that they were doing these things. They were putting down the maintenance to take care of it. They were doing the regular sealing and those crack filling and the resurfacing, but they haven't, right? They just let it go. So they've been reactive patching instead of proactive planning. And when we only patch the worst holes each spring, we aren't fixing the underlying failure of the road bed itself. We're applying a Band-Aid to a broken bone, right? It's not working. So no dedicated revenue stream for infrastructure. Many cities have a permanent street fund, often tied to dedicated local tax or fee. Lorain's infrastructure funding depends heavily on grant hunting and temporary fixes, which leaves us at the mercy of external politics and fluctuating grant cycles. Like right now, I mean, where is it going to go with the current administration? We don't know. We may lose funding, and we may lose funding moving forward from Ohio. We never know from budget cycle to budget cycle without a dedicated revenue stream for infrastructure. And so, you know, potholes aren't just inconvenient, they're expensive for residents too. Every blown tire, every bent rim, every damaged suspension is a hidden tax on drivers. Once we could reduce if we managed our roads responsibly. You know, ones we could reduce if we managed our roads responsibly. And so, I'm just gonna double check and make sure I don't have any more. I had some information here on potholes a little bit more just to make sure. Uh, 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 Man, I did a lot of work on this thing. So some of the stuff was, when I posted in a more shorter context would be, I agree. So, Janine, I would say that I had a message from Russ Van Wormer, who is a local host and a radio host who has 20 years of street experience, who claims that he's offered multiple times to educate street staff on how to properly fill, clean, fill, and properly maintenance a hole, and that it'll stick instead of turning into this whatever it turns into. And they always politely refuse. So that would be amazing if someone could teach them that. So I did the science, the freeze thaw cycles, the budgetary breakdown. We have too much reliance on state and federal grants, which are inconsistent. No dedicated, stable local funding stream for preventative maintenance. Little to no long term planning for inevitable water and sewer replacements. And the human cost, that potholes aren't expensive for drivers, they endanger lives. Ambulance response times suffer on bad roads. Businesses lose customers who can't navigate cratered streets. I've been saying this. No one's going to go to these nice things you keep trying to build because they can't drive on the roads. Last week, a resident told me they like hitting a pothole in Oberlin and they blew out 2 tires and cracked a rim. The repair bill was over $800. That's a mortgage payment for some families. So, we need to figure out a dedicated infrastructure fund with stable revenue source. Maybe we have to implement some sort of tax. But the bottom line is this, folks, we can't continue to drive around on streets like this. And if they're not going to do it, somebody needs to suggest it. Proactive maintenance programs, right? Not just emergency fixes. We need to have a better, more proactive program of sealing and resurfacing streets. And we need to invest in technology to monitor the road conditions and prioritize all of these repairs. Because that's what's not happening right now, right? Like, we're continuing to see the same problems over and over and over again. And with the potholes, like today was a prime example. I'm on the news, I'm talking about it, I'm out there on the side of the road, I'm addressing it. So I had given them all the contact information, and on Friday I'd been told by Mayor Bradley they're going to get out and take care of it. Well, come Monday, I guess on Sunday, I had that video, and that's when Channel 19 reached out to me. And then I said, sure, I can meet with you tomorrow morning. Well, apparently they called Mr. Arroyo, who was at work in Akron. So he got on and he did his little Zoom video with the reporter for his little bit of time, and he had to schedule. They had an exact time to schedule because, of course, he had to go to work. I, on the other hand, was available. And so he did his video from there, not even seeing the streets, while promising that street's going to be fixed. A street he's probably arguably not driven on very often, if ever. And so I'm out there doing this. I'm out there making the difference. I've been advocating for these streets for 2 full years. And a lot of people got online and they're like, what about Tower? What about this? What about that? You know what? Quite frankly, I'm running for 6th Ward. And in this instance, what about those streets? Right now, I'm just trying to get 2 fixed. Like, I'm happy to help everyone get their streets fixed. And I believe that this program will work for everyone in the grand scheme of things. But right now, you get it 1 or 2 fixed and you start solving problems. People see that, they start to listen. That's where we start. We got to get a couple of them fixed. Sure, these have been on the list, but I find it amazing now suddenly they want to talk about it. They want to talk about it. So the next time you see a fiery council meeting clip on Facebook or hear rumors about hiring freezes or layoffs, just know exactly what's happening behind the scenes. It's not just drama. It's democracy in action with a whole web of rules and laws shaping every decision. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, show up and speak out, folks. Like, people were there tonight. There were 10 people signed up to speak. Granted, a lot of them were in cheer squad, but they signed up to speak. They exercised their rights to government and to democracy. Again, I would argue that there was some, again, you held everyone else accountable to those rules except for Ms. Zelina. I don't understand why she got special treatment and no one else did. But you have that right. Again, so just understand, folks, city council will make special treatment for people they like, just not for people they don't like or people they don't really have an interest in, I guess. I don't know. What determines who gets extra time? What determines who gets more time? What determines if the head of the Main Street thing gets more time or Miss Selena gets more time? But, that's not me. I'm not on city council. If it were given to me and they asked me to vote on that motion that was abruptly thrown out in the midst of a meeting without being put on the agenda, really for no good reason whatsoever, without any sort of background or information thrown in, I would have voted no. But, that's just me. So show up, speak out, but just follow the rules when you're there, guys. Like, sign up to speak, get there early. I do. Yeah, occasionally I whisper something under my breath. That's one thing, guys. That's the freedom of speech aspect, or even directing your government on occasion, especially if you signed up to speak, getting to say certain things in certain tones, in certain ways, in certain loudness, and say certain words and criticize certain people in certain ways. Those are all legal. But when you stand up in the back of a meeting and start yelling like you're flinging, poop across the room, that is not legal. That's not what we do. And so again, I still do believe that the city and Mayor Bradley and Joelle had every right to have her charged. I still believe that the law department, the prosecutor's office, and the police department are wrong. I think that Deputy Chief Fallon's wrong. I think that Chief McCann's wrong. I think that the law department's wrong. And again, I get it. Who are you, Aaron? I don't know. I'm just the guy that always seems to be right. Because I read the law. I read the rule. Your local rule doesn't supersede state law. And she didn't sign up to speak. And she did disrupt the meeting. And the meeting did stop. Whether he adjourned it or not, it stopped. We couldn't move forward until she stopped. She controlled the meeting in that moment. So yes, it was a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And I would argue that somebody was severely lacking in a current very valuable commodity. Like, I understand eggs are expensive, and in eggs in Espanol, I believe they call those huevos. And I just feel like if you have the huevos to go after Garen, then you should have the huevos to go after somebody else that violates it. But basically what you did was you cut off the huevos of certain people and gave them to other people. And so now we have this unbalanced rule enforcement in city council. Now you've enforced it on one person and not on the other. And again, Garen's my reporter. So I sent in there to find out what Miss Selena said. This is what they do. They enforce Rule 47 on people arbitrarily. Certain people get it, other people don't. And I think that the questions that were asked tonight by, I think it was Miss Spellacy, when she was asking, like, well, did we vote on this rule? Like, when did we find out about this? Who found out about this? I feel like they always say people voted on this, they did this, they said this. In a reality, it's just somebody going and talking to Riley or Zaleski or one of these people in the law department, right? And someone just saying, yeah, that sounds right, and throwing it like a shitty diaper and sticking it to the wall. Sorry, it's the first time I cursed, but that's what it feels like. Like, let's see if it sticks. Like, you just don't, like, read the law, follow the rules. Like, I mean, if anybody believes this wasn't planned, God, I mean, I love a good, narrated situation. I love being a puppet master. But if you guys think that that wasn't planned, if law enforcement wasn't there intentionally, Joel, you and Bradley got set up by Miss Hilton, more than likely by my council person and Miss Brunowski. And I can't prove any of that, but circumstantial evidence. I saw the news talking to Miss Hilton. I saw Arroyo talking to Miss Hilton. I saw, Arroyo backing Mary's play. So again, like, whether or not this is all true, whether or not the person that swore him in on Sunday immediately had some sort of pull with him and all this stuff went down, all I know is when you look at that, when we're talking about like what's happening behind the scenes, right? It's not just drama, it's democracy in action with a whole web of rules and laws shaping every decision. Sometimes it is just drama. Sometimes it is a web of lies and a web of deceit. And sometimes it is a play. And that's what this was a play. That for, all I can say, folks, is you got to show up. You got to be present. You got to be there. And again, we're going to be requesting those records. I strongly suggest City Council, you put your phones away and turn them off. And if you're not using your city issued laptops, and even then, I wouldn't be typing, whispering, communicating, playing around underneath calendars, touching your phone, not paying attention to stuff going on, typing on your computers, doing anything other than writing notes and paying attention to what's going on for that hour and a half that you have to be in that building, that you get paid to be our servant. That's all you should be doing during that time. Nothing more, nothing less, just that. Governing and doing those roles. So when you do all these other things inside of the meeting, you are breaking the Open Meetings Act, and you need to stop. So, folks, that's it for today's deep dive. If you want to uncover more local government stories and breakdown for the process that affect your life, let us know, and we'll catch you another time. I want to remind you guys all to check out the Vermilion Daily and the Lorain Daily. They're a couple of local newspapers that have really been pumping out a lot of local content lately. They've been covering a lot of the stories that, quite frankly, some of our more established news media have not been doing. And so, go check it out. Go down there and check out the situation for Lorain and Vermilion Daily. They're both putting out great knowledge, great articles. I find Vermilion Daily covers a lot of, if you're not from Vermilion, they cover a lot of county stuff. And I noticed that a lot of their stories get reposted on Lorain. Lorain Daily covers the Lorain City stuff, and it does cover the Lorain County stuff that Vermilion Daily covers as well. So you guys go check them out. They both have Patreons up. For like $5 a month, you can get a subscription to their service. And granted, it's free, but these people are providing you with news media for free. Joseph and his brother are providing this information to us, the citizens of Lorain, because they believe that we deserve it, that we deserve better. I'm running for office because I believe our streets and we, the people, deserve better streets, and we deserve better. I help get certain people elected because I believe, regardless of what happens, we deserve better. I believe that people can be taught, that people can be educated, that we don't have to get rid of every government official. If no other reason than if you look at our city council today compared to 2 years ago when I first showed up, and prior to that, prior to other people really starting to speak out, prior to the Jane Morales is getting up there and encouraging everyone, and the Garen Petty is getting out there, like, it's taken a village to get people to the point right now where they're actually doing their jobs more or less in council. You hear them make comments all the time that they never made on the previous videos of, well, for the people at home watching, well, to explain to the public better. Like, go back and watch those old meetings. They didn't give two craps about what we thought back then, and they do now. Now they recognize people are scrutinizing their actions while they're on council. Everyone got mad at Garen for those lawsuits. Well, for the record, folks, I could file all those same lawsuits that Garen and Robert filed before against you for the continued use of your phones. I could I could file an injunction against all of you. And if you don't think I would win, you're wrong, because all I do is win. So I'm not gonna not state a claim on which relief can be granted. I'll get my claim on which relief can be granted. I'll find a way to find that claim and make it work like I always do. But if I have to, I will treat you like children and say, put your damn phones away when you walk into my city council hall. Put your phones away when you're working for me. Put your phones away, silent them, and put them in your pocket. If they tell us citizens that we can't, silence your phones, please, you need to do the same. Stay off your laptops. I'm going to request all the work and emails that you did tonight in city council, and I'm going to request all the texts that you sent. Normally I wouldn't care, but if you're so important that you have to take out from the hour and a half that you give us every night, I'm giving you an hour and a half right now. Like, we're at an hour and 20 minutes. Like, and it's just all me, right? All me talking. They can't give us an hour and a half. I occasionally look over my phone because Garen, who could just use this damn messenger right here, decides to text me and distracts me. And see, look how easily I'm distracted. I lose my train of thought. That text message comes in. So that's why when you go into city council, turn it off. Leave it in your car. That's another promise I'm going to make. My phone's not going to go in there and be sitting next to me while I'm in city council. That's your time, the people's time. That you're paying those people to sit there and do what they're doing. That's the only time that they're required to be there. All the other stuff, the committees are volunteer. And for all those people, talking about like jobs and whatnot, for those that do have jobs that are considerably outside the area, how are you going to volunteer for those committees? How are you going to have the time if you're working as a full-time drug and alcohol counselor? Because I know what that entails, because I do it and I'm not full-time. But I have a bachelor's degree and I'm a social worker and I probably get paid considerably more for doing it. So again, when you look at that stuff, like, how are you going to manage your times for these people? But just understanding, folks, that if you don't start showing up to these meetings, understanding that, the future is ours to build. The issues we've covered today aren't insurmountable. They're choices. And the question is, will Lorain continue down a path of secrecy, dysfunction, and decay? Or will we, the people, demand a government worthy of our city's history, our city's history and potential? The future of Lorain is ours to decide, folks, but only if we pay attention and take action. So thanks for tuning in tonight to Lorain Politics Unplugged. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, your voice matters. Law enforcement, be lawful, not awful. The rest of you, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for following. Check out the page for more information. Check out the page if you want any information about upcoming podcasts. Subscribe to the YouTube link, like, subscribe, check it out. Add the page, like and subscribe to my political page. Do all the above. I'd really appreciate it. And I never thought I'd be the guy saying, hey, like. Yeah, click that like button. But seriously, guys, like, click that like button. Like, you could really click the like button. That'd be great. But I'm pretty sure the naysayers and the trolls will be coming along soon. So I'm going to take off. Thank you, guys. You make it a wonderful night.